Hello. I gotta really figure out this lighting and shit. Yeah, I'm still in my car. Cut out some of the noise. Sorry about that. So, as of yesterday, the 21st, I had 17 months sobriety. Yay me! Yes, I am proud of that fact. But just like I said in some of my earlier sobriety videos, it was one of those things that kind of came and went. I knew it was coming up, but I wasn't so focused on it that I knew. As a matter of fact, it was an app on my phone that reminded me. And I was like, oh shit, what do you know? So, I'm having major deja vu at the moment. This particular moment I dreamt about several years ago. Anyway, so I recently had a friend who was talking to me about that, and they know some of my history, and they know that I've had longer stints of sobriety than even this, and they were asking me essentially the same question I got asked the other day, which is how do I cope with life on life's terms, but pretty much how am I going to deal with whatever comes my way. And I gave a slightly more succinct, summarized or paraphrased version of the answer, which was essentially by building and creating a life that I no longer feel I have to escape from. Obviously, there will always be outside or external events, influences, whatever, that are going to get thrown my way. Self-love, self-forgiveness, ownership. These are the more useful tools in my toolbox. But that conversation kind of spiraled into essentially talking about self-sabotaging behavior, or another way to look at it is self-fulfilling prophecy. She was giving me examples of relationships and situations that she's been in the past, and why she has certain boundaries, so forth and so on. And of course, a lot of it was experience-based perceptions. But I kind of walked her through, guiding her through how things in her childhood have affected her entire life. From examples of interactions from her parents and so forth. How these things get programmed into our subconscious mind, and how people are taught, most people, myself included, were taught a form of conditional love. It's an unfortunate byproduct of the world we live in. We live in a world of relativity. You don't know good unless you know bad, and you don't know bad unless you know good. And true unconditional love does not mean unconditional acceptance of one's behavior. This also came up in topic was forgiveness, and how a lot of people seem to think forgiveness automatically means another chance. No, it doesn't. That's mercy. Sometimes grace. Forgiveness is, in a way, accepting of one's behavior because they didn't know better, they weren't taught any better. That doesn't always mean you're going to get another chance. Most times it does, and myself included. When I forgive somebody for a particular whatever grievance, yes, of course I'm going to give them the opportunity to learn from it and not make the same mistake again. But in the particular context of the conversation I was having, I was able to, and they already had a lot of this information and discernment themselves, but I was able to point out how certain subconscious beliefs that they had learned growing up were replaying again and again and again in their life. This is true with addicts as well. This happens to a lot of us. And I was able to point out how the subconscious mind reinforces itself. Okay. Typically, the scenario goes something like this. You end up with inheriting your parents' baggage, trauma, whatever. Their self-worth issues, self-love issues. And it's not a fault. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing either. It just is. This is just, they can't teach you what they don't know. This is what it means to break generational curses. Okay? Is to take all of that was inherited and given to you and change it. Become better. Heal it. Is really ultimately what you're trying to do, what we should all be trying to do. So anyway, in a particular conversation scenario, it was a self-worth issue, and there were certain things that would trigger this subconscious belief, and therefore it would manifest itself in a form of codependency, pretty typical people-pleasing, which I'm guilty of myself and have been. I'm healing that and have been for a while. The point is I was able to show this person how through these different scenarios and disagreements and everything else, it was the subconscious mind just reinforcing its own belief. The subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between good or bad. All it knows is the information you give it. All it knows is the symbolisms and the signs and the emotional attachment to it. That's the linkage it knows. It doesn't know whether or not the emotion is good or bad or anything like that. And it kind of operates just above an instinctual level. Self-preservation. Okay? But because we have a higher mind that sits on top of that reptilian brain at the same time, there are the basic, very raw instincts, eating, drinking, the urge to procreate, these kind of things, survival as in fight, flight, or freeze response. But then on top of that, you have essentially your and the way I understand it anyway, you have your emotions and all of these things, which, if you want to break down the science, is just a biochemical reaction in the brain, okay? Which then, of course, triggers certain neuron paths to fire from the upper down to the lower instinctual brain, and they talk back and forth. They have a feedback system. Another topic for another time. Point being is, the brain doesn't really know the difference between emotional vulnerability and physical vulnerability. It's the same type of release. It's the same type of communication along the same pathways. So when you find yourself in a situation where you are feeling emotionally vulnerable or threatened, there's a part of your brain that perceives that just as if you were being chased down by a bear. It's the same instinctual response. All right? Obviously, though, it's what we would call a higher order or a higher level response. Because of that, there's a whole lot of gray in there. It's not quite cut and dry as flight, fight, or freeze. In some cases it is. In extreme cases it is. Here's a great simple example of what I'm talking about. And I'm sure everyone has experienced this at some point in their life. If you're have had any significant relationships at all, that's, I'm going to leave before you leave me. Extremely common. It's a very typical response for what they call an avoidant attachment style. The point is there's a self-worth issue in there. There's a fear which masks a more raw emotion, okay? And that raw emotion is, a feeling of unworthiness or a feeling of unlove, which a deep-seated part of the brain interprets as a vulnerability. I can be hurt. I can be damaged. This is life-threatening when it breaks down, okay? So your initial reaction, of course, is just instinctual almost. But once you start to recognize that behavior, or that particular pattern of behavior, and recognize where you keep putting yourself in situations, and choosing situations, and reacting to situations in almost an autopilot mode that give you that constant validation of that belief. That's what the subconscious does. It always seeks to validate itself. Otherwise, that programming is useless and it gets moved out of the way. This is how you reprogram your mind. You start learning to identify what validations you're seeking. And of course, the deeper level, why? Because once you understand that particular pattern, now you can change it. Take ownership of that reaction. Take ownership of that emotional state. Accountability. That's how you take your power back. And that is how you change your world into reality. As within, so without. If you practice more self-love and self-forgiveness, and you learn to self-validate and change those beliefs so that you no longer have to get them from an external source, aka addiction, and you get them from an internal source or higher source, which is also internal. We'll get into that another time. You'll start to reprogram those patterns. And once you change the way your subconscious mind views yourself as worthy of love, as enough, as, getting rid of the fear of rejection and whatnot, because you are all you need. You are whole. You are complete. And you can provide for yourself everything that is absolutely necessary. From an emotional, mental, and spiritual standpoint, obviously. Physically, you obviously need to eat and these things. Once you can start to accomplish that and start to change those particular patterns and behaviors, that's when the real healing starts. That's when the real growth starts. And if you can reach a point where you not only are self-reliant, but you're reliant on the divine, well, now you're starting to come into Christ consciousness. As within, so without. So once you change your internal reality, your external reality will start to reflect that. You will naturally start to gravitate to other people, other situations, and whatnot that don't reinforce those same, I'll use the modern term, karmic or toxic behavior patterns. Okay? That's how you break the family curse. That's how you break the generational curses. And that's how you heal, and that's how you grow. Once it starts to happen, and you start to realize that you are not only worthy of self-love, but of the love of the divine. You start to see it everywhere. That's what it means to walk in grace. Grace doesn't come down to you, you rise up to it. And that's why love is the highest vibrational frequency you can hope to resonate in. We live in such an absolutely breathtaking, mind-blowing, beautiful world. We really do. Start training yourself to look for the beauty and the magic and the mystery in all things, and it will be there. You've been training yourself for your whole life to look for the negative. Change it up. What's the worst that can happen? Nothing. 9 times out of 10, your fears are completely unfounded, because 9 times out of 10, the fear you have, if it came to pass, would not change your current situation at all. I don't want to call that person because I'm afraid they might reject me, or they might judge me, or I'm too embarrassed, I'm too ashamed. I can't believe I acted the way I did. Really? So you're in a position of worry and anxiety, guilt, fear, shame. For the tarot people out there, the 9 of Swords. Because you're suffering your own imagination. And so you are punishing yourself and this other person by not following your heart. Yet if you were to contact them and all of that came to pass, you would still be in the same situation you're in right now. Except for one difference. You would have the truth. There would be no more left to imagination. You would not have to suffer the imagination anymore, because you would have your answers. In the worst case scenario, you go on with their life, your life and their life, and you stay in no contact. But you have an answer. Best case scenario, it could be something you probably can't even imagine.